Hi everybody, so today we're going to have a look at context and kind of the story behind stories, or what can add to the kind of stories that we read or watch. So your goal for today is to understand what the term context means, and your success criteria means that by the end of it you should be able to tell me what context is, so define it for me, but more than that, tell me what are the different factors that can make up a context. And you also need to show that you can understand how context affects the composer, and therefore how context can also affect the meaning of a text. Alright, so what does the term context mean? All stories are told at a certain point in time, in a certain place, by particular people who have certain ideas. Context is when the factors that surround a composer influence their work and the meaning of it. So basically it means that wherever you are, whenever you're writing, all of the things around you affect the story that you're telling. So we can never actually be separate from a story because of who we are and the things that are going on around us. Alright, so some of the factors that affect a composer can be the time in history that it was written, the composer's own personal background, alright, so where they grew up, what their family was like, those kinds of things, what their what their background's like. The social norms at the time that a text was created, alright, so a social norm is basically what's thought of as normal at the time that someone's writing something. So texts that were written, for example, in the 1950s are different today because our ideas are different. Alright, the social norms are different. The cultural environment of a composer. So the culture of someone is based also usually on where they come from, where they grew up, who they grew up with. So a culture is, we've got indigenous cultures, there are Middle Eastern cultures, all of these different types of cultures, Western culture, which make up how people see the world and how they tell stories. Last one is geographical components. So the geographical context is where you are when you're writing. Alright, so in order to fully understand any text, this is really important. We have to understand the background to the text. What was the composer going through when they were writing that story? Because that's what really allows us to understand the story properly. We don't just look at a story or watch a film or read a book without understanding a little bit about why it was written, when it was written, and who wrote it. Alright, so it takes into account an audience who would have received the story at the time. And as 21st century audiences, we have to think about what our own context is like. So how do we read stories? Right, our own context affects the way that we understand things because we come from a certain place at a certain time, and maybe we don't always understand what's going on in a story. So context teaches us a lot. So let's have a look at this one. Now this is an advertisement from the 1950s. The woman is opening or looking at a tomato sauce bottle, and it says here, "You mean a woman can open it?" So in the 1950s, this was thought of as a good ad because women were always in the kitchen, they were always doing the cooking, and this was a social norm. Now in today's context, in the 21st century, we probably wouldn't like this so much because women aren't expected to be in the kitchen. We're not expected to have those kinds of roles that we had in the 1950s. Women now are looked at differently, which we can see here in Serena Williams's ad. Alright, she's strong, let your game speak. Alright, so let the things that you do tell people who you are. So these two things, in different contexts, different times, 1950s, 2000s, show women in really different ways. It's all because of context and the way that audiences see things. Alright, now here's another one from the 1930s. We have a bunch of workers, construction workers, sitting up on top of a building in New York City. They're just starting work on building a massive skyscraper. Now you notice that they are having lunch. They don't have any safety harnesses. It's all in black and white, alright, because that was the context of the time in the 1930s. Now in London, not long ago, excuse me, they recreated this photo. The context tells us a lot about what workers' rights are like in history. All right, so here in a modern day, we've got colour, we've got fellas who are wearing harnesses. All right, they're safe because their contexts are different. Different times, different places, and different ways of dressing and working. All right, so context is the key to understanding a text. However, we cannot always understand where context ends and where a text begins, because we're always looking at a text from our own context. So we can't always understand everything about a text because we weren't there. And that's how context teaches us about different times and different places. So the more information that we can get, the more we learn. All right, so the more background information we have, the better off we are at understanding where a story is coming from and why the composer made it. So here's one last example. See these kids walking down the street? Looks like a really great day, other than the fact that it's raining probably because they have umbrellas. Little family going on an outing. However, if I change the context slightly by giving you more information, we actually find out that this was set in Ireland during the Civil War, okay, when the army or the IRA was really active. And so it changes the story completely because I've given you more information. So that's what context is. It just allows us to understand where a composer is coming from and why they're telling us the story that they're telling us. Okay? It allows us to understand why a text is created, what influences its creation, and it gives us an idea about history, about humanity, and allows us to compare our own lives to those in the texts that we study in films and books. So the story behind the story, or the context which surrounds a story, gives us a deeper insight into the world. Okay? So have fun doing a sheet. Bye!